I am here with Dan Muddy. He's just had 3 hours of testimony in front of the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission. Dan, thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
Peter, glad to be here.
I know you're looking back in time. You're not with Fannie Mae anymore, but I want to ask you about the thrust of the argument here. Fannie inflated the housing market, inflated the housing bubble, and as a result was one of the culprits behind the financial crisis. True or false?
False. I mean, I think as ever, these situations are a lot more complicated than you would see as a headline. I think the answer is yes, absolutely. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were put in the business of increasing home ownership, providing liquidity, increasing affordability in the housing market. And they did that job. And as a result, a lot of people got into the housing market. The tragedy of all this are the folks who got in without much equity at the very end of the increase in home prices, when in 2007 going into 2008, the home market just completely cratered, and those folks got left on the wrong side of the street.
The argument in this room here, and from others as well, is that it was Fannie that got in late into the game on Alt-A, on subprime, and as a result, you exposed yourselves and ultimately taxpayers to greater risk. You want to address that?
Yeah, it's an easy shot, but it's wrong. You know, the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac don't originate any loans. The loans are all made out there by the banks and the non-bank financial institutions who then decide to sell those loans to Fannie and Freddie. So what Fannie and Freddie do is really a reflection of the overall market. The overall market went in the wrong direction, and Fannie and Freddie, as being limited to just the housing market for affordable housing just in the U.S., were right there on the beach when the wave hit.
You were questioned about that in there, and there was talk, you and your colleague Robert Levin talked about the decisions, the debate within Fannie Mae about whether to get further into Alt-A, though. There was a calculated decision to get more into that market, was there not?
Well, we've been in the market for a long period of time, and remember that Alt-A, an A mortgage is a Fannie Mae mortgage, and Alt mortgage is an alternative to a Fannie Mae mortgage. So as a result of that, a lot of business was going around us precisely because we were a higher standard, a more expensive option. And as that business began to go around us, our business went down and down and down and down until we have to ask the question, is this about where the market's going, or are things that we ought to be doing prudently with good process around them to participate in these parts of the market? Can I go back now and look at every loan we've done and pick the ones I'd rather not have? You bet, but that's in retrospect, and it's a lot easier.
Well, let me ask you, you do have the benefit of 20/20 hindsight right now. You talked about mistakes made on the part of Fannie Mae, mistakes made on the part of Congress, HUD, forcing you all to get into serving lower income Americans, also underserved areas. At the end of the day, was that push for Americans to have own homes, to increase that amount, was it a mistake?
Look, I mean, I think home ownership has been proven since the country was founded to be a really important thing for the country, good for communities, good for cities, good for families. The problem that we were trying to get to the nub of today was you have a government mission being executed by a private company. And my own experience was that when the 100-year flood came, you couldn't please both of those masters, and one thing or the other had to give. Now, the important thing is to think about where we go forward from here. Do you want the government involved in housing? Because if you do, the taxpayers will be on the hook. If you don't, then rates are going to go up to homeowners. If you don't want either of those things, you're going to have something that sounds an awful lot like a GSE or a hybrid organization. And I think we're working on this, but we haven't had the debate to figure out what the right answer is.
Well, but you did offer some ideas there. In your opinion, if you had to construct this again, how would you do it?
I would have less government involvement. I would have some government involvement at the early parts of the home ownership cycle. Help people move from being renters into buying affordable housing on loans that they can get in, and not just be home buyers, but eventually become homeowners. And that means probably something more like 80% down, means something like a 30% fixed rate loan. It means something that's been underwritten better by stronger financial institutions than some of the practices that we saw late in the cycle.
Listen, we're going to hear from two former Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac regulators afterwards. I've seen some of the testimony. I want to get your reaction to it, because you know some of the criticism of the GSEs as well, their lobbying efforts and that sort of thing. Armando Falcone, he says ultimately the companies were not unwitting victims of an economic down cycle or flawed products and services of theirs. Their failure was deeply rooted in a culture of arrogance and greed. I should be clear that this was a failure of leadership. Now, he was regulator before you took over as CEO, but you want to respond to that?
There were a lot of things with respect to the approach and the culture that I tried to change as CEO. It doesn't change the fact that the regulator nor the company, nor the market, nor policymakers, nor Congress was ahead of the game in seeing that a 30% decline over 2 years in home prices was a possibility. I sincerely hope that in the course of all the discussion about financial regulation, what we eventually wind up with a regulator for Fannie and Freddie is better, stronger, better funded, and actually more skilled.
The question as well, and he talks about it as well, the portfolios, the mortgages that you all held. And this came up in the course of the conversation today. There's an ongoing debate about whether those serve only the profit side of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, or whether or not they serve the larger housing mission, the HUD mission, if you will, of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Again, you want to address that issue because you were pressed on that by Doug Holtz-Aiken, by others in there. Those portfolios served only the profits.
Well, the answer is everybody wants to have the show played out in red or black. It's one or the other. It can't be both. The fact of the matter is, and the hard thing about running an organization like Fannie Mae is it had to be both. I make no apologies about Fannie Mae trying to make a profit. If you don't make a profit, you don't stay in business, you don't earn revenues, you don't grow capital, you can't meet your mission. But I also make no apologies about channeling global capital into U.S. home ownership. Now, doing both of those things on the top of a 100-year flood was the problem, and that's why we need to fix it now.
All right, you are currently the CEO of Fortress Investments. Let me ask you in our final moments here, what's your sense of what's going on in the economy right now, the investment environment? You've moved on from Fannie Mae, you've got new opportunities now. What are you seeing?
Well, it's nice to have a perspective from outside Washington. I'm happy to tell you that. I think we're gradually getting better. I think we've moved through the crisis, the uncertainty period, the illiquidity period. What we're seeing now is the beginning of a lot of sales, trading of assets. The assets that aren't on the balance sheets they need to belong on eventually have to clear, eventually have to trade. Markets will find bottom. The big question to me is how deftly can the government pull its supports that have been in place appropriately for a year and a half or 2 years out of the economy and bring private investment back in to support it without creating a bump. So we're watching that.
Are you encouraged so far?
I am encouraged so far, actually, but it's very early days.
All right. Dan Mudd, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you
Pleasure.
joining us.
Thanks.
A
Good to
return
see
to
you.
Washington for Dan Mudd.